Hmm? Good afternoon, everybody. I welcome you all for this webinar. The theme of this webinar is Prepare, Plan and Execute. I thankful Dr. Vidya Patel Madam and my Department of Pharmacy for giving me an opportunity to do a lecture in this webinar. So my topic today is preoperative assessment. So as we all know, the nasal passages, pharynx, larynx and trachea and large bronchi will be involved in the passage of the air during respiration. So I will be dealing with my topic under these headings: need for the airway assessment, basics test to predict difficult airway, X-ray in assessment of airway, role of USG in assessment of airway, what are the recent advances in the assessment of airway. Why it is necessary? If you don't do air assessment properly, then you can land up in inadequate ventilation and inadequate esophageal intubation and difficult tracheal intubation. The incidence of tracheal intubation, difficult tracheal intubation is 17%, and 28% of anesthetic related deaths are secondary to inability to mask ventilate or intubate. So prediction of the difficult airway helps us to give time for proper selection of equipment, technique and personnel who are experienced in the difficult airways. There are some definitions everybody should know. So according to ASA, that is the American Society of Anesthesiologists, the situation in which the conventionally trained anesthesiologist experiences a difficulty with mask ventilation and difficulty with tracheal intubation or both. That is difficult airway. What is difficult ventilation? That by the trained anesthesiologist who is not able to maintain the saturation of more than 92% with the face mask for ventilation with 100% inspired oxygen, provided the pre-ventilation oxygen saturation was normal of that patient. What is difficult intubation? By a trained anesthesiologist taking more than 3 attempts, longer than more than 10 minutes, and failure of optimal best attempt with the available best gadget with a change of hands. That is difficult intubation. Then what is the prevalence rate? Difficult face mask ventilation is 0.1 to 5%, and difficult LMA insertion is 0.2 to 1%, and difficult intubation incidence is 1 to 2% in the normal surgical population. So what are the components of the airway examination? Whenever you do PAE, pre-anesthetic evaluation, so the main joints and the parts of the face which are involved in the intubation that are important in assessment of airway. So first you go to the PAE, you see the face of the patient, then you should see for the temporomandibular joint, you should see for the mandible, teeth, oral cavity, nose, and then upper half of face, lower half of face, and mandible movement, and then occipital movement, and then extension of neck and some thyroid mass or anything like that. So these are the components of the airway examination. And this is the protocol you should follow. First, you should take a history properly. Then you should do GPE, general physical examination, and then specific tests and indices or investigations. So history-wise, history of surgeries, history of burns, and concurrent diseases like diabetes mellitus, muscular dystrophies, or any other diseases. And if a history of difficult airway in a previous surgery, who the patient has got some documentation for that, then that is a most reliable predictor of difficult airway, and you should be prepared for a difficult airway for that case. In GP, there is something called the 4Ds, that dentition, which involves a prominent upper incisors or receding chin, you should be careful. A distortion like edema, blood, omitus, tumor, then you should be careful. Disproportion, short chin to larynx distance, bull neck, large tongue and small mouth. If it is there, you should be very careful. Dismobility of TMJ joint and cervical spine. If it is there, then you should prepare for a difficult airway and anticipated difficult during intubation. If patient is very obese or a patient is pregnant patient, you should be double careful to assess the airway as well as prepare for difficult intubation. If patient has a beards plus or minus, if it is there, then it can add up to a difficult airway. The specific tests I will go in detail. In investigations wise, you should do nasoendoscopy, USG, X-ray, CT, MRI, depending on the severity of the difficulty. How do you assess? They have got two individual indices and group indices. The mask ventilation should be assessed first, then laryngoscopy, then intubation. This is a manner we should go ahead. You can remember the mnemonic by OBES, OBESE or BONES. OBES is obesity more than 30 kg per square meter. This is a obese mnemonic, helps us to remember the difficulty in mask ventilation. And B is beard. If beard is there, then it will add up to a difficult mask ventilation. Elderly male patient or female patient more than 55 years. If patient gives a history of snoring, then it is also add up to our difficulty airway. The edentulous. If patient has got a no teeth, then definitely it adapts to difficulty in airway. If patient has got 2 or more of these risk factors, and then definitely will end up in a difficulty mask ventilation. And the same mnemonic, they added one more M, that is a mask seal difficulty due to receding mandible or syndromes of the face, abnormalities of burn stricture. This adds to the one more entity, and rest all will be same, like obesity, advanced age, no teeth, as well as snorer. And the second point is atlanto-occipital movement. That is very important. So they have got an imaginary line just below the upper occlusal surface of the upper incisors. Then you tell the patient to extend the head or the neck. If he's making more than 35 degrees, then that means it is a normal intubation. Patient will not have any difficulty during intubation. So they have graded 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is more than 35 degrees. 2 is up to 22 degrees. 3 and 4 less than 21 degrees adds up to our difficulty laryngoscopy. There is an atlanto-occipital extension. What warning sign of Delican? So you should place the finger exactly in front of the mentum like this, and one finger just behind the occiput. So usually in normal patients, this front index finger will be lower side than compared to the posterior finger. So once patient has to extend the head or the neck, then the front index finger should come upwards compared to posterior finger. If it is there, then it is normal. If it is coming straight or down like this in the diagram you can see, then definitely will have a less space for manipulation during laryngoscopy, and they have got a patient with a thick neck, or there is some mass or some problem with the atlanto-occipital extension. In those cases, you should be very careful during intubation. This is known as a warning sign of Delican. And coming to the prayer sign and a palm print sign, which are most commonly seen in diabetic patients. So usually, whenever patient has known diabetes, then you should see for the palm when you go for PAE, pregnancy evaluation. So thick palm, white color, then there will be something known as a small joint immobility syndrome will occur in diabetic patients. So if you ask the patient to approximate the palm like this, so there will be some gap just between the fingers. This is a prayer sign. If it is positive, then there is a collagen deposition at the interphalangeal joints. That's why it is not allowing to approximate the fingers. This is prayer sign. If it is like this, it is positive. We can see in the diagram. Then if a prayer sign is positive, you should do palm print sign. On the dominant hand of that person, should apply the ink and then press over the white paper. So if you are able to see all the phalanges, then it is grade 0. If there is a deficiency of the 4th and 5th digit, then it is a grade 1. If the deficiency of 2nd to 5th digit, that is grade 2. And only tips are seen, that is grade 3. So very important palm print sign. So they have 2014 IJ's article, he has narrated very good about this palm print sign and prayers, and you can go over this. And they have studied this article. In the same article, they have compared the Mallampati grading, thyromental distance, and the palm print sign and the prayer sign. They found that the palm print sign has got a higher sensitivity, that is 76.9% compared to 61.5% in prayer sign, as well as a positive predictive value of palm print sign is 71.4 compared to 24.2 in prayer sign. The one thing, if prayer sign is positive, you should do palm print sign because it has got a most positive predictive value as well as the highest sensitivity. That's why palm print sign is a very good predictor of difficult airway in case of diabetic patients. Then comes to the assessment of TMJ joint, temporomandibular joint. There are two movements. First 2 centimeter of the mouth opening will be assessed by the rotation of the condyle, and next second 2 centimeter opening by the displacement of the condyle. That is very important. So you can see in this diagram, you should place a finger, just index finger in front of the tragus, and then you place a finger at the just below the in front of the mastoid process. So if patient has to open a mouth like this, this index finger can insinuate this in front of tragus. So if you can insinuate, then that means that both the temporomandibular joints are normal. If you're not able to insinuate the finger, that means there is some problem with the TMJ joint. And you can feel the mandibular movement while opening the mouth. This means the patient has got an adequate mouth opening and there is no difficulty during intubation. And then something known as the mandibular protrusion test. So you can see this in the diagram. If the lower mandibular incisors cannot come outside above the upper incisor, that means it's a grade A. This is grade A. Then grade B is the lower incisors just approximating the upper incisor, that is grade B. And the lower incisors cannot come out of the upper incisor, that is grade 3, grade C. So grade B and grade C will add up to our difficult airway. This is another mandibular protrusion test. Is also a very good predictor of difficult laryngoscopy, because a small mandible will add up to your difficulty in manipulation of laryngoscopy. And aspect of mandibular space, there are some distances you should remember: thyromental distance and the hyomental distance. So usually this determines the laryngeal and pharyngeal axis will fall in the line when the AO joint is extended. That's how we should assess. Thyromental distance is approximately 7 centimeters. You should measure from the thyroid cartilage to the chin. Thyroid cartilage chin, it is in a fully extended head. Normally it is 7 centimeters. If it is low, then the less than 3 fingers, then it is indicative of difficult airway. So limitations: there is a little reliability in prediction and variation according to height and ethnicity. And to improve this, because reliability is little less, they have modified it to, they added the ratio of height to thyromental distance, that is RSTMD. If it is more than 23.5, then it is a very good predictor bedside screening test for difficult laryngoscopy. Thyromental distance is also known as a Bartlett's test. So RSTMD you should remember. If you know the height of the patient, then thyromental distance definitely we can assess the that is a difficult airway or no. Then coming to hyomental distance, that is from the hyoid bone to the mentum. So grade 1, 2, 3. Grade 1 is more than 6 centimeters. Grade 2 is 4 to 6 centimeters, and grade 3 less than 4 centimeters. If less than 4 centimeters, it indicates that it is impossible to do laryngoscopy and intubation. Then incisor gap. So you should always measure this. If you can admit the 3 fingers, and when a patient opens a fully mouth opening, then it is normal intubation. We can expect. If it is less than 3 centimeters, then definitely it is a difficult laryngoscopy. If it is less than 2 centimeters, then definitely it is a difficult in LMA insertion. Then usually it will be affected by TMJ as a upper cervical spine. Then sternomental distance, there is something known as a from suprasternal notch to mentum. That is a distance is 12.5 centimeters. It is a single best predictor of difficult laryngoscopy and intubation, because it has a higher sensitivity as well as specificity. So it is at 12.5. To make it very easy to remember, so mouth opening should be 5 centimeter, hyomentum distance is 6 centimeter, thyromentum is 7 centimeter, and sternomentum is 12.5. 5, 6, 7, 12.5. You should remember distance like this. And then upper lip bite test is also known as catch test. So class 1, class 2, and class 3, they have divided like this. You can see in this diagram. They have taken the vermilion as a standard line. So if the patient can bite the upper lip beyond the vermilion line, that is class 1. If he is not able to bite the upper lip beyond the vermilion line, then that is a class 2. Then just below the vermilion line. Then if patient is not able to bite the upper lip at all, then it is a class 3. So class 3 will definitely add up to the difficult intubation. This is the upper lip bite test. And there are some tests for assessing the oropharynx during laryngoscopy and the intubation. So there is something known as Mallampati grading. I think everybody knows the original Mallampati. They have classified only 3, class 1, 2, and 3. And Young's modification, they have done one more, that is 4. So you can see in the diagram in Mallampati 1, you can see all 4 structures: soft palate, fauces, uvula, pillar. Then the class 2 is a soft palate, fauces, and uvula, and class 3 is a soft palate only, you can see, and class 4 is a hard palate. The significance of Mallampati scoring, the class 3 or 4, it signifies the angle between the base of the tongue with laryngeal is more acute and not conducive for easy laryngoscopy. The limitations of this is it is a poor intra-observer reliability as well as a limited accuracy compared to other predictors, and it is a good predictor in case of pregnancy, obesity, as well as acromegaly. So they have studied in 2012 article, they have compared the Mallampati grading to jaw protrusion test. So they have found that out of 169 patients, you can see in a B that difficult in lower jaw protrusion test. Out of 169 patients, the 105 patients has got a difficult Cormack line grading. That is 105 patients. And in the first Mallampati grading, out of 63 patients, they have got a Cormack line grading 39. So they found that jaw protrusion test also is a very good predictor of difficult airway. When you compare all this, we'll come to a conclusion. Assessment of the glottic opening. So you should see when you are doing laryngoscopy, you should see how is the glottic opening. They are Cormack line grading as well as POGO, the percentage of glottic opening. So Cormack line grading, grade 1 is a full glottic structure can be seen. In the left to upper diagram you can see, and the grade 2 is only posterior part of the vocal cord is seen, anterior commissure is not seen. And grade 3 is epiglottis is seen, but it is not liftable. You cannot see any other structure except epiglottis. Grade 4 you cannot see anything, any glottic opening, no glottic opening is seen in grade 4. These are the Cormack line grading. They have modified, it's Cook's modification. They have made 3 into 3A and 3B. If it is liftable, that is 3A. If it is not liftable, that is 3B. And 2A, 2B also they are divided. If you are not able to see arytenoids, then 2B it is. Then there are some group indices, the Wilson score, Benioff sunglasses, and Lemon assessment, Arnes simplified score, Megbel's 4Ms and 4Ds. 4D is also covered in GPE. So Lemon trial, so L is look externally for facial trauma, large incisors, beard and large tongue. So you should divide it 3-3-2 rules. You can see this diagram. 3 fingers, interincisor gap, 3 fingers of the thyromental distance, and 2 fingers the hyomental distance. The 3-3-2 rule. Then you should see for the Mallampati grading, as already told you. Then obstruction, any type of obstruction, tumor, some foreign body, leg infection, then edema. That is the obstruction you should look for. The neck movement, chin to chest movement, you should see always for assessing the airway. And then coming to the in ICU patient, how we should evaluate for assess the airway in ICU patient as well as COVID-19 patients. They have made something known as a Makacha score. So the MACOCHA, that is the Makacha score. Mallampati grade 3 or 4, he has created it is 5. Obstructive sleep apnea is rated as 2. Cervical spine movement is limited, that is 1. Mouth opening less than 3 centimeters is 1. And coma, if patient is in coma, that is GCS less than 8, it is 1. So hypoxemia less than 80%, that is 1. And non-anesthetic intubator, that is 1. So 0 is a very easy intubation, and 12 is a maximum, that is very difficult intubation. If the score is more than 2, you should predict the difficult airway, and you should prepare as well as call senior anesthesiologist for intubating the patient. This is Makacha score for COVID-19 patient. This in a nutshell you can see in this diagram. That is whenever patient has got a Mallampati grading 1 or 2 and neck extension more than 30 degree and TMJ distance is more than 7.5 and mouth opening more than 4 centimeter, definitely they will have a Cormack line grading 1 and 2. If it is more than 3 and 4, then definitely upper lip bite test 3 or 4, then definitely you should use video laryngoscopy or fiber optic bronchoscope, because you can expect a difficult airway. So it's very upcoming, this assessment of airway. There is a 3-column model for direct laryngoscopy. So in green, there is one article, that is anesthesia intensive care in 2010 by Greenland. He has narrated very well about this model. So you can see in this diagram, the in front of the green line, it is an anterior column. Posterior to green line and anterior to red line, it is a middle column. And posterior to the right line, it is a posterior column. Anterior column, it mainly forms the inverted pyramid. So you can just imagine the points on the left side of the diagram. You can see the lower incisors, there is a one apice, and the hyoid bone, second apice, and the temporomandibular region. This one forms an inverted triangle. Same triangle will be formed here as well as in center, the dotted line. So this will form the inverted pyramid. So this mainly constitutes the submandibular space, submandibular tissues. Whenever you are going for PAE, so you should always palpate for the submandibular space, because if it is very thick and it cannot be displaced, that means patient may go for difficult intubation as well as he cannot displace the structures. If it is very soft, then even though patient is obese, then you will definitely have a easy intubation. That's how you can assess the anterior column. The middle column is mainly assesses the such as the laryngeal tumors and lingual cancer hypertrophy, and the adequate history should be taken, and imaging that is of the airway should be done. Then nasopharyngoscopy is the tool in a middle column. Usually it will be done by our ENT specialists colleagues, so they do under local anesthesia in the operating room before surgery, so that we can have a real time as well as a correct picture of the glottic opening and opening, where is the narrowness, where is the tumor. But only disadvantage of this is whenever you induce the patient, if the glottic opening is very less because of some tumor or stricture, some compression extra tracheal, then definitely the airway may collapse. So that is the reason nasopharyngoscopy is a very good tool for assessing the airway, but you should be careful if the glottic opening is very narrow. Then they can have a X-ray, CT scan, MRI for scanning, which will definitely help us to the accuracy as well as spatial resolution. Then assessment of posterior column. So they have, everybody know about the sweeping position. There are two angles. The one is the supraorbital, infraorbital, and the mentum, foramen mentum. That is, if you draw a line, if it is making more than 15 degrees, then it is a good position for the intubation. And this suprasternal notch and the cricoid cartilage, if it is making more than 35 degrees after giving a RAM position, then it is a good for intubation. That is RAM position or sniffing position. In obese patients, this position is going to be very, very helpful during difficult airway. Then use of USG, and we are using USG in and out during blocks, nerve blocks. Now they are using in ICU. So that's why beyond the blocks, you can use for assessment of airway. What is a transducer? Which transducer should use? A linear high frequency transducer, which is helpful to see the superficial structures, and curved low frequency transducer, that is sagittal, parasagittal, used in the submandibular subglottic regions can be seen. The only one transducer, if you have got only option, then you should take the linear high frequency, which will suffice for most of the views. The transverse view, there are some planes, transverse, also known as axial, horizontal, or coronal, and sagittal, mid sagittal, parasagittal, up to 2 centimeters parasagittal. These are some views. So you can see in this diagram. So they have in this study in 2016, Reddy, they have studied the USG planes. So they have named the plane A, plane BC, plane E, and plane G. They conclude that plane G is a very good predictor of seeing the airways in a neck. So you can see in this diagram that the yellow line is a good plane because it passes through the a preepiglottic space, hyoid bone, a thyroepiglottic ligament, and thyroid cartilage. You can see in this diagram. So this is the image which shows what are the measurements you should do when you are going for the mentum to hyoid bone, and then distance from the skin to thyroid cartilage, epiglottis, vocal cords, cricoid cartilage, thyroid isthmus, and suprasternal notch. This distance should be measured in case of when you're using USG for assessment of airway. Okay, that will definitely tells us the difficulty of airway. And this is the image. So there are some article we have compared the ANH at the anterior neck soft thickness to hyoid bone, and anterior neck soft thickness to VC, vocal cords, pre-E epiglottic space, EVC epiglottis to vocal cords, pre-E to ratio of pre-E pre-epiglottic space to EVC. So they have made the red mark, that is ANS to VC, the pre-E to EVC. Those are the very good predictor of difficulty because the p-value is less than 0.05. So you should remember ANS to VC is a very good predictor. The ratio of pre-E to EVC is very good predictor of difficulty in case of USG. And this is on some diagrams. So for assessing the airway, on the left side there is a sagittal view. So we can see the sternocleidomastoid muscle, thyroid membrane, epiglottis. On the right side, thyroid cartilage, thyroid gland, and the left side the hyoid bone. So when you're doing this, if you're not able to see the hyoid bone, then that definitely indicates there will be difficulty in intubation. And the same image, if you do transverse view, then you can see like this: vocal cords, glottic opening, and the thyroid sternocleidomastoid muscles. Okay. Then if you do transverse view little up, then you can see like this: thyroid membrane, skin, pre-epiglottic space, epiglottis. You can see this. Then radiological assessment. The X-ray is a very important tool for assessing the airway. That is the lateral and cervical X-ray film, and head should be in the neutral position. So what are should they think? That is an anterior atlantodental interval. That is ADI. Normal it is less than 3 mm in case of adults, and the children it is less than 5 mm. So you can see this is the interval. The arrow mark showing the interval. And then atlanto-occipital gap, the distance between the atlanto as well as the occipital gap, if it is less than 5 mm distance, then definitely it adds up to your distal movement and can have a difficult intubation. And posterior depth of the mandible, that number 2 they have marked down, that is posterior depth of the mandible, and it indicates if it is more than 2.5 centimeters, then that predicts the difficult laryngoscopy or intubation. And they have done some ratio of effective mandibular length to posterior depth. You can see the number 1 what they have showed is effective mandibular length. So from to number 2 is the posterior mandibular depth. The ratio, if it is less than 3.6, that predicts the difficult laryngoscopy and the intubation. The same thing they have written here. In nutshell, occiput to C1 process less than 5 mm, difficult airway. Increase in posterior mandibular depth more than 2.5 cm, difficult airway. Ratio of effective mandibular length to its posterior depth less than 3.6, it is a difficult airway. Any tracheal compression can be a difficult airway in X-ray. Coming to the next modality, there is a very important CT scan. It is taking very good popularity in assessment of airway because it can assess the craniofacial dysmorphisms and turbinate hypertrophy, adenoid hypertrophy, mucopolysaccharidosis, and airway anomalies and syndromes like macroglossia, retro or magnognathiae. So Nagy et al. They have compared the CT scan with the clinical parameters. They concluded that CT is a good predictor of compared to clinical parameters assessing the airway in relation to tongue and the posterior pharyngeal wall and angle between the epiglottis and the tongue. And Prasad et al. They have studied compared the CT scans and ultrasonography in relation to the hyometric distance, depth of epiglottis, above the head bone and pad thickness of thyroid cartilage. So in which they have concluded that CT scan is more precise. And by the CT scan, if you do clinically, you cannot assess the pre-epiglottic and para-epiglottic space invasion. So you can see in the diagram, the arrow mark is showing pre-epiglottic space invasion. So this is only picked up by the CT scan. Clinical examination will never tell you about this factor. That's why CT can be used as a tool for assessing the airway. Then coming to CT virtual endoscopy. It is you are using a CT scan for the imaging and you are making it as a virtual look like endoscopy images. So when you are doing endoscopy images, the same image you can see here. That is why you can assess the naropharynx, larynx, tracheobronchial tree, and Bal Bhaskar sir have very well narrated in 2017 IJA article, so you can go through this. So they have used the 16 slice CT scanner or 64 slice CT scanner, and this is one image, the 4-year-old girl with a bony prominence on the right side of colon atresia. Left side image is normal, that's CT1 virtual endoscopy, right side image is abnormal. So it is a turbinate T, turbinate SP soft palate. So the same diagram abstracts what the mark is thickened omer and is the colon atresia on the right side. Arrow mark is showing the colon atresia. The same diagram. So they have, this is the image taken from that journal. The same diagnosis can be done by CT scan. Then the 46 years old with a woman with a Ranke's edema. So in the virtual laryngoscopy on the left side, you can see the polypoidal mass emanating from the mid and posterior left true vocal cord. The same diagram on the right side, you can see when you are intubating the patient in real time. So the images are almost same, and definitely will get an idea where is the tumor, how is the size, and where is the gap. Okay. Then contrast CT when they do, they can see like this. This is a very important and upcoming branch, the modality of assessing the airway, that is 3D printing, which is a very fast, convenient, and relatively affordable technique. And that's why they use in some airway assessment tool. So you can diagnose preoperatively exactly. What is the theme here is they take a slices of 1 mm, less than 1 mm, 1.2 mm of CT scan slice. Then they will import to the some software, that is STL software, that is the statistical language images. They will be sent to that 3D printer, and they will make some apices like vertices. So if they attach, then they will become a model. So this model, it can be taken as a module, so that you can give to PGs or a staff before surgery or before any procedures. So this will be a simulation technique in future. So before surgery, before any procedures, you can get a 3D printing of that, and then you can, for example, you can see in this diagram, this is a patient. This Han et al. They have reported this case. That is a patient that is a post-laryngeal patient. They have tracheostomy too. The anesthesiologist was suspecting some narrowing of the trachea. So for that reason, they have done the 3D printing. This patient is posted for hip surgeries. So they want to know which tracheostomy tube can be replaced. So for that reason, they have done the 3D printing. The right side image, what you're seeing is a 3D printing. So that arrow mark is a narrowing of the trachea. This is the module. So in that trachea, you can definitely see which number tracheostomy tube can be easily go. So on the patient, when you are doing real time, then definitely there will not be any confusion. The technique will be straightforward. The tube should be straightforward, and there is no confusion, and the patient will be very safe. That's why the 3D printing definitely will be a simulation technique in future. One more diagram, this is taken from the Radiology Journal. So you can see on the left side A diagram is a 3-dimensional printed model of the tracheobronchial tree, normal tracheobronchial tree. So you will have this in your hand, tracheobronchial tree. The middle finger, it is a fiber optic view of the bronchial intermediates in the acute anatomy, actual anatomy, but it is a virtual endoscopy, that 3D printer. Whereas the right side, so what you're seeing is a normal bronchoscopy in actual anatomy. That's why these images are almost similar, so that definitely it will help you to do the simulation technique as well as this one. In a nutshell, what we can use is X-ray, very useful quick diagnosis for the conditions like emergencies, and USG, it is a real-time assessment. Definitely it will be a very good utilization of the tool for assessing the airway as well as a confirm of the airway. Then CT scan is more advanced, precise than X-ray, and extensive applications definitely help in pediatric patients because it takes very little time to assess the airway, and sedation is also required little less. And using this CT scan, you can upgrade to CT bronchography or virtual bronchoscopy. Definitely these reconstruction images will help you to assess as well as use this technology for maintenance as well as a management of the airway. And the MRI is not taking so importance because it is a very costly, and then it is time consuming, and the pediatric patient cannot be like claustrophobia. That's why it is not so useful, but in some conditions that it should be used. And MRI, one more problem is if air is there in the MRI film, then that image cannot be seen properly. That's why MRI is not becoming so important. And the last and very recent technology is 3D printing. Is the latest revolutionary and upcoming technology, and the 3D printed models, the image data acquired from CT scan, then they use as a simulation technology for teaching purpose as well as for managing the case as well as the safety of the patient. And what is the take-home message? Nothing is more expensive than the missed opportunity. So you should never miss the opportunity. The difficult airway assessment must be performed prior to all attempts, and criteria helps to identify difficult airways. It does not guarantee an easy intubation. So you should be prepared for difficult airway for every case. Because something unanticipated difficulty can happen in some normal patients also. And airway assessment is a critical part. That's why it's very, very useful and very important assessment before surgeries. These are my references. Thank you. Any question?
Obese patient whose Mallampatti is very dangerous looking. So how do you think our postgraduate students should proceed, sir, right from pre-anesthetic evaluation?
So first, patient is morbidly obese patient. So first you should calculate the BMI. That is, I already told you, for difficult masculinization, that is obesity is one criteria. And you should see for the neck circumference. If it is more than 40, then acts as a difficult airway. And you should see all 4 measurements. Already told you, the interincisor gap, then the hyomental distance, and thyromental distance, and sternomental distance. That is a 5, 6, 7, and 12.5. If it is less than that, and definitely it acts as for a difficult airway. You should prepare for this. And usually obese patients, there will be history of snoring. So that should be taken in very typical, because history of snoring is there. Definitely you will have a difficulty ventilation also and difficulty intubation also. And you should see for the neck extension. So if it is more than 35 degree, then only it will be difficult intubation. If it is less than 22 degree, then there is a grade 3 and grade 4, what I told you. That is a grading will definitely helps you to predict for difficult airway. And in obesity patients, you can do Mallampati grading, as already Madam told. If it is 3 or more, you should have taken it as a difficult airway. And considering these all things, you can go for the USG before pre-operatively assessing all the measurements. So if you are not able to see the hyoid bone in the submandibular space, that is very good predictor for difficult airway. And a pre-epiglottic space, if it is more than 2 centimeters, it also tells is a difficult airway. It's a predictor of difficult airway. And I already told you pre-VC, the ratio is also a very good predictor. And you can take a X-ray to assess all the lengths. So if you do all this, and definitely if it is a minor surgery, you can predict, and you should plan for a difficult airway trolley before induction, and you should plan for the surgery. And definitely you will intubate without any problem. So you should keep always a video laryngoscopy and all things. Sir will cover up that.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we will go on to the next talk. So let me introduce our guest speaker, today's guest speaker. I indeed consider myself privileged for the opportunity of introducing our guest speaker today, Dr. Ravindra US. Dr. Ravindra US completed his MBBS in Government Medical College, Bellary. He passed his DNB in the year 1993 and did his MD also in the same year from KMC Hubli. With a teaching experience of almost 25 years, Sir has been actively involved in training postgraduate students of MD diploma in anesthesiology, and he has also been a national board examiner. He has also trained MBBS students, maxillofacial surgery students, physiotherapy, and respiratory therapy technology, and biomedical and nursing students in airway management. He has been the founder secretary of All India Difficult Airway Association and subsequently national vice president of the same association. He conducted the first national conference of All India Difficult Airway Association in Mangalore in the year 2010. He has published over 10 national and international journals, and has been a guest faculty in several national and international conferences. His fields of interest are difficult airway management, pediatric anesthesia, pain management, quality concepts in anesthesia. Sir also has been a mentor of our department since the year 2013, and he has guided us, and we have developed to this extent largely because of his attempts. So I thank Sir for that. So I present Dr. Ravindra US to you all.
Good evening. Can you hear?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
we can hear you, sir.
Okay. It's a great opportunity for me to be with you from such a distance, actually. At the outset, let me thank Professor Madam Vidya Patil and the entire very beautiful team of anesthesiologists from the Department of Anesthesiology, BLDA Medical College. It's an honor, privilege, and a pleasure for me to be associated with you all for such a long time, and probably it was a very humbling experience for me to be with you all at all the times and share my knowledge and learn from you people so many things. And probably I would say the human qualities, or whatever we call the human factors in anesthesia, is something which is very conspicuously present in the Department of Anesthesiology, as I could see in the BLD, and that is one of the focus of my today's talk. We had a very interesting and informative talk by Dr. Shivanand, whom I always respected because of his commitment to the teaching. I saw him in the simulation center last time when I came, and I observed a lot of things being done there and the overall activities of the department also. So with this background, and I have a lot of friends from each, everybody in the department has been extremely kind and nice to me. I can't name everybody, but each and everyone was very nice to me. And I must remember with gratefulness the support from Professor Dr. Talikoti, sir. My best regards to him. And I always seek his blessings as a senior and a great anesthesiologist. So coming to today's topic, I chose this topic because, am I audible clearly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. This topic became close to me because of my interest in teaching and involvement in the simulation center. I'm sure Dr. Shivanand also will be fairly well versed with the topic. So this is slightly off the mark. It is little beyond the conventional teaching of airway management, but an extremely important part of our day-to-day life. We don't want to see a crisis at any stage, but it does happen. So airway crisis management. Next, please. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. Warm greeting from my institution, that is Jeridong Park Medical. Jeridong Park Medical Center, and it's a very beautiful JCI accredited hospital. JCI accredited hospital from Brunei, Darussalam. That's a very peaceful country. Darussalam means abode of peace. So it's on the South China Sea. What you see is the seashore, and our hospital is bang on the seashore, and a very beautiful country. And I'm just speaking from my residence in this place. Thank you. Next slide. So this, I'm sure all of us will agree. Albert Einstein is the person who said, a wise person. So obviously we'll avoid the problem. But when you speak about airway management, it's impossible to avoid all the problem, but at least we can prevent majority of the problem and solve most of the problem. Next. Okay, the component what we call the crisis resource management, which has been converted to crisis management or taken out the essential from this particular vast area of management to crisis management. So this is from aviation. The medical or the healthcare system has taken this from aviation, where safety is extremely important. It's about 20 years now since this CRM, what we call crisis resource management principles, were first applied, and anesthesia was the specialty to first use these principles to improve the patient safety. To all the residents, please remember that you are the proud inheritors of the safety policy or safety protocols. The anesthesiologists have always been in the forefront in improving the patient safety in the medical field ever since anesthesia became an independent specialty. So this aspect, crisis management, is the articulation of principles of individual and group behavior. It's not only individual but group behavior in ordinary and crisis situation that focus on skills and dynamic decision making, interpersonal behavior. Each word is loaded with meaning. So each word we will see as we move on. Next. Yeah, so just only 4 subcontents or 4 aspects. One is the introduction, some introduction to the topic with some literature. Then genesis, how a crisis develops. From a non-critical situation, it could be difficult situation, but non-critical, how this becomes a crisis. And how do we manage and what affects the outcome. And lastly, how to prevent. So each 4 of these, I'm sure you will agree, will increase our performance as far as airway management is concerned. Next. So some basic facts which I think residents should remember at all the times, and it's they are applicable to each one of us. That is, every airway needs to be assessed. That's why we had this app topic before the starting of this topic, the assessment, where Dr. Shivanand has extensively covered the topic. So all patients but do not need intubation. We have a tendency to equate airway management with endotracheal intubation. We need to get that away from mind. That is, all airway managements do not mean that the patients need intubation. Next, intubation is only a part of airway management, which is a long process, multi-phased process of which intubation is only a part. Very important part, no doubt, but it is not the entire airway management. And oxygenation is the priority. I'll be stressing it 101 times in the talk, and it's worth it. And finally, multiple attempts increase risk of crisis. This is one of the reasons why crisis could develop in an unexpected circumstance. That is, repeated attempts of doing something. Next. So just a brief review of literature and data before we go ahead with this crisis management. So we know that anesthesia mortality has consistently declined. See, for example, if you say it used to be somewhere around 3 per 10,000 before 1970, when I was, say, 5 years or 6 years old boy. At that time, per 10,000, anesthesia mortality used to be around 3. From there, post 1990, that is, it reduced to 0.3 per 10,000. But one of the important contributors or contributing factors still remains the airway related incidents, whose contribution can vary anything between 11 to 40%. It may not be, like, depending on what data you are looking at and what subpopulation you are looking at, it can be as high as 40%. I mean, the contribution of the airway incidences to the anesthesia mortality, which itself is now very, very less. Why you can't make it zero? Why can't we make, or why we have not been able to achieve zero mortality in anesthesia? Because of the inherent patient characteristics, because of the problems imposed by the surgery, and because of the limitations what we still have in our understanding in the equipment, so on and so forth. So what are the sources of literature and data what we use for airway? First is database. That's DAD, that is Danish Anesthesia Database. Please type this. You get very good number of articles, which is recent, which has analyzed after the NAP4, this Danish airway database from the multi-centers or multiple centers of Denmark. They collected data over a period of time, something similar but different from the NAP4. And then registries. Database is a wider population. Registries are more focused, and you have the NAP4, that is National Audit Project of UK 4. So that year it was on airway complications. NAP5 is about awareness. NAP6 is something else. So it goes on like that. And POCA, that is Perioperative Cardiac Arrest Registry. So if you see any one of them, or the National Emergency Airway Registry, so these are all the sources of information about the difficulties and the percentage contribution of different factors, etc. Then they developed an airway app for anonymous reporting of the airway complications, because it's very difficult when we have done some mistake, we have encountered difficulty to reveal our identity for the fear of being punished, for the fear of being discredited, discriminated, all these things we better avoid. So this, what we call the closed claim project or something similar in a virtual world, that's the airway app. And then mortality reviews, single case analysis, all these things provide the literature and data for this crisis management. Next. So difficult mask ventilation, you can ask the residents, can I have a question like, I said 5%, Dr. Shivanand said another value, difficult intubation, I am saying 5.8%, he said another percent. It is both are likely to be true. It just depends on from where the data is taken. I might have taken from one study, he might have taken from another part of the study or another subpopulation of the patient. So what the literature says is that difficult mask ventilation incidence is around 5% in the general population. You're not talking about the population of only pediatric patients or maxillofacial patients or head and neck cancer patient, where it could be much higher. And the failed mask ventilation incidence is less than 1 in 700. So there is a progressive difficulty which finally results in failed ventilation. Similarly, difficult intubation is, so this is from a recent journal, that is 2018. The reference will come towards a later part. And difficult intubation is almost similar to this one, but failed intubation is around 1 in 1,500. So if you take your in a institution, for example, your department, maybe once in a few months, you will encounter a failed intubation, however good the collective effort may be. So whether that turns into a crisis or not is the question, and you don't want it to be. And hypoxic brain damage related to the airway is still very rare. But for the patient who is affected, it's a serious question. That is 1 in 1,80,000 when you are talking about the operation theater statistics. That is anesthesia, where airway management is done mainly in prepared patients under controlled conditions, whereas it increases 60-fold in ICU because of the physiologically difficult component, also physiologically poor cardiorespiratory reserve, etc., and increases 30-fold in the emergency. It's not 30%, it is 30-fold in emergency department. So some of the facts that they have repeatedly encountered, if you see any literature, these appear in one or other statement, like one or other formats, multiple attempts without changes. If you are attempting second time for intubation, you must make some changes, either the position or the device, change from direct to video laryngoscope, you change the position, you use bougie, you change the size of the blade, whatever available and whatever you think. And if you make multiple attempts, the subsequent attempts, the success rate drastically goes down. So if you fail in the first attempt, the chance that you are successful in second attempt is only 20%. But the risk of producing trauma goes on increasing. So similarly, another interesting observation from data is that if you look at, say, 100 patients in whom intubation has failed, 10% had mask ventilation also difficult. And failed mask ventilation increases the chance of the other way around. If you take 100 patients in whom mask ventilation failed, then they have 10 times increased the risk of difficult intubation or failed intubation. Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, because I am not seeing everybody now, I just need some feedback in between. Is it okay? Am I going at a proper speed?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. Yeah, next, please. So continuing some more literature, why I am putting all this literature is because they form a sort of foundation fact for what we are going to learn further. So here, composite airway failure, this is a new terminology which I also came across recently. So this term was coined some time ago, somewhere 2010, if I see the literature. That means the basic truth is that when one technique fails, the risk of failure of other techniques is increased. The sentence is wrong. The second failing is not there. When one technique fails, the other techniques also are likely to fail. So you have to be extra careful. You must substitute yourself with another person. You might have to substitute one device with the other device. Second, no technique is without complications. The risk of complications increase when the technique is not chosen carefully or when the technique is executed in an inappropriate manner. So where direct laryngoscopy is not exactly the choice. You know that the Lehen and Cormack grading is difficult. You have a video laryngoscopy, still you have not chosen that because you are not used to that. That is wrong. Next. So just to begin with 4 patient examples. That will, I am sure, drive home the points what we need to know. Then as a passing reference, another set of 4 patients will just say, okay, now next. First, we'll see patient number 1. That is 37 years old, mother of 2, non-obese, no comorbidity, posted for elective routine nasal endoscopic procedure. Anybody other than those who are sitting the dais, those who are participating delegates can tell the name of the patient? Anybody other than Dr. Shivanand or Madam or the faculty of the department, for the residents or other viewers? Who is this patient? Any idea? This is a landmark incident. That is why I just asked. This management or failure, whatever you call, you'll see, resulted in some changes. Development of a new organization. So now, so this patient on assessment, she was assessed preoperatively by a qualified and knowledgeable and respected anesthesiologist, and the comments were okay mouth opening, slight limitation in neck movements. What happens if a resident writes like this? Obviously, he or she is taken to task by any faculty or the HOD or anybody. What do you know? Why do you write like this? But at certain stages, our tendency changes. And of course, I don't say it is wrong, but it may not be appropriate also, especially when things start going wrong. When everything is fine, yes, that reflects my experience. But when things go wrong, that reflects my negligence. So it is just the two sides of the same coin. Next. So you please notice mouth opening is okay and very minimal limit. And next, the manage. That is all the assessment. No allergies, no comorbidity, no previous surgery, nothing related. Previous surgeries were there, but probably under local anesthesia, like a spinal or regional anesthesia, nothing more mentioned about that. Yes, patient comes to theater on the appropriate day, consent is taken, everything routine, ASA monitors were attached, and they start routine induction. Induction, the plan was to put a flexible LMA for the nasal procedure, that's an accepted practice, under propofol and deepening with isoflurane and remifentanil. That was the plan. But immediately after induction, the anesthesiologist realizes that the mask ventilation is difficult, which he never expected because the examination didn't indicate any indicators of the difficult mask ventilation. So he inserted oral airway, still it was difficult. So he gave another 50 milligrams of propofol additional dose, as we all do, to improve the depth of anesthesia. Still not possible. He tried to insert supraglottic airway device as per the plan. Laryngeal mask, or I think intubating laryngeal mask, it was also not, it was difficult. So then next. So at this stage, what we see, the saturation, within 2-3 minutes, the saturation started dropping. This is where, even as a listener, we start shuddering inside our mouth. If I'm in that position, saturation falling to 40% during airway management is something which is, you know what Gandhiji has written, my heart sank into my boots. So that's exactly what happens. Your heart will sink into your boots and patient develop bradycardia. So that results a sort of, you will be paralyzed. You will not be able to think unless you are really trained in the cognitive process as well. So the right thing, in one way, what the anesthesiologist did was gave atropine to treat bradycardia. Though this bradycardia is secondary to hypoxia, oxygenation is more important, but it is symptomatically important too. And succinylcholine intravenously to relax so that whatever difficulty could be overcome. And it is a known fact that the difficult mask ventilation is high when you have not paralyzed the patient. So when there is a difficulty in mask ventilation, it is a recommended practice to give a relaxant unless there is a clear-cut contraindication for the use of muscle relaxants. And multiple intubation attempts by 2 different consultants were performed in spite of knowing that the saturation is falling, the bradycardia is ensuing. So they tried. How did they try? They tried, I think, with the Buji, it was not possible, direct laryngoscope, video laryngoscope also probably, but they could not intubate. It was a grade 4 laryngoscopic view. Next. Next slide, please. So at this stage, the anesthesiologist, as it happens to everybody, we were immersed with the intubation. We are obsessed with the this one, or we are so much involved in the intubation process and we forget the timeline. we forget to look at the monitor. The theater nurses suggested that front of neck access, why don't you do, or why don't we consider, and patient to be shifted to ICU. He probably didn't listen at all. Later he says that I didn't listen to that. So by then 40 minutes nearly passed, and at this point of time, before this, they inserted finally the intubating LMA. There's a one slide probably missing. After the intubation of, after the insertion, this one, correct. So intubating LMA after 20 minutes after the initial attempts with Scolin, the SpO2 rose to 90% with a partial ventilation. But what was done instead of continuing the ventilation and improving oxygenation, they again tried to intubate the patient because intubation is the definitive airway. So initially blind intubation through the intubating LMA, followed by fiber optic intubation. So both failed, unfortunately, to their bad luck, to patient's bad luck. Next, saturation again dropped, patient developed tachycardia because atropine was given. And then theater nurses suggested FONA, that is front of neck access, and ICU admission. After 40 minutes, he finally decided to abandon and allow waking up of the patient, allowing spontaneous breathing, discontinuing the remifentanil infusion, discontinuing isoflurane, and he inserted oral airway and shifted the patient to recovery and handed over the patient to the nurses there, and he went on to start the next case. One more fact to be included is that as he was struggling during the second attempt, one more colleague of his came from the next theater, again a qualified and reputed anesthesiologist. He also could not succeed. And the third attempt was by another, they say Dr. E. So he attempted, that also failed. So 3 persons have attempted totally some 3 to 4 times endotracheal intubation directly, then through the intubating LMA, then through the fiber optic scope. Next. So then we'll stop there. We'll see how the management at a later part. We'll combine the 2 cases and then see. Okay, next we go to the patient 2. That happened about 4 years later. This publication is about 2010. So if you see here, this patient is a patient in whom you don't see a neck at all. This one is called Klippel-Feil syndrome, where there is a fusion of the vertebra at different level, double level, or multiple levels. So as a result, short got restricted neck movement. It was found that restricted in towards right, towards left, and the posterior and anterior. In all directions, the movements were restricted, and added to that, he had congenital deafness. So he could communicate only through the sign language, very anxious because of all these reasons, adult patient. And worst is he presented for a urgent surgery, luckily not a life-saving, but a urgent surgery for aortic dissection with a blood pressure of 200 by 140 millimeters of mercury. You can imagine the stress for the anesthesiologist. And he was assessed by a cardiac anesthesia fellow. And then the anesthetic management responsibility came to a senior qualified experienced anesthesiologist. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is, you can see the title, Crisis Resource Management of the Airway, applied to a patient with Klippel-Feil syndrome, congenital deafness, and you don't need to read the finer prints, just the title. Next. Next, please. Yeah. So this, if you cannot see that, either you can zoom or I will read it for you. This was, so he immediately organized a team because it is not something which cannot be done safely. Patient safety is at the center of all our actions. So he is probably undergone under the training in crisis management. So they organized a team. They had 4 members in the team. So he added another 2 fellows or the residents of anesthesia. So making 4. And he discussed and considered 4 options for anesthetic management. For induction, the conventional intravenous anesthetic, you can see the next one. Next slide. See, 4 options he considered. Conventional intravenous, then inhalational induction, though a patient is adult, usually you don't go for inhalation induction, but here it's a different situation. You have certain advantages over that. Consider with the awake plus block or awake with dexmedetomidine. So for every set, he considered the effect on the onset. For example, intravenous induction, very rapid onset. There is a chance that you lose control of the airway very rapidly. Patient could be hemodynamically become unstable. Then, whereas inhalational, yes, onset may be little stormy, but patient may be stable. You can easily retrieve him from a obstructed level to a non-obstructed level. Yes, maybe better. Awake with block, again, onset is late, local anesthetic toxicity, obstruction, all these things are there. So potential for loss of airway, cooperation is difficult with block or awake. Specific complication, maybe there will be a hematoma if you give a block, or a risk of aspiration, which is very unlikely because it's a reasonably prepared patient. Then awake with dexmedetomidine again may take time, and the hemodynamic effects is not much with dexmedetomidine. So remarks. Finally, they zeroed it. Next, he made a flow chart. Next. Sorry. This is the flow chart they used. So urgency of the surgery scheduled. Okay, it's a urgent surgery. So anesthesia choices were regional techniques excluded because it's a dissecting aortic aneurysm. So general anesthesia. So what are the airway choices? You have conventional approach and you have a awake fiber optic intubation. Awake will be difficult because of the communication issues, and so it was thought the best option will be fiber optic intubation after inhalational induction. What about mask ventilation? So if first mask breath is after the inhalation induction, you are first checking for mask ventilation. Next, please. Yeah. So if you see here mask ventilation, it was successful. So they went to do a direct laryngoscopy with a video laryngoscope. So they could see the vocal cords or they could not. They were not able to see the vocal cords, but everybody could see the status of the video, the airway, and it could be recorded. So this will leave what we call the digital footprint of the airway. So that's a new terminology now, digital footprint. This is the way to document the difficulty encountered. So next, they decided, or as per the plan, they did the fiber optic intubation under inhalational anesthesia. They could deepen the plane because the mask ventilation was successful. And next, please. Yeah, here, this is a very important slide. How the teamwork was organized. Team must have a leader, team must have followers, team must have role assignment, team must have a good closed communication system, and they must use critical language. So all these things were ensured to be present. So if you see that closely, you can see later also, there were two residents, CA2 and CA2 resident. So that is, their responsibility was, one is monitoring, the other one was in charge of the anesthetic drugs, and during fiber optic, the device for during intubation and after the fiber optic. So then the cardiac fellow anesthesiologist who saw the patient, he was included. So he was involved primary airway management under the leadership of the attending anesthesiologist, and they switched the roles among themselves. And the mother was there as a translator initially till the son went into sleep. So patient's anxiety was taken care of. Mother also was happy. The teamwork was at its peak. Next.
I need your consent on
Next. Yeah. So now, again, we'll stop here. So this patient had a successful outcome. So the first patient died after the on the second day. So one was mortality, the second one as a successful outcome. And another aspect is the first one, there was a surgeon waiting to do the nasal procedure anyway in the surroundings. The institution had a very well equipped trolley and all the facilities. Okay, now coming to patient 3. This was my patient some long time back in our Indian typical private nursing home practice setup. So 45-year-old male posted for humerus shaft plating, non-obese, no other comorbidity as far as I can recollect. This is a fair recollection, not a very exact representation of the fact. No difficult airway predictor. So intubation attempted under pancuronium. That time pancuronium was the drug of choice and it failed. 2 attempts failed. So the colleague from other OT called for help, and he also attempted intubation in between ventilating remarks, progressively difficult mask ventilation. 3 or 4 attempts we must have made, yeah, totally 4 attempts. And at that time, the nursing home or the hospital did not have the supraglottic airway device. All of you who practice will know this situation. You can imagine very well how this would be. Next slide. Yeah. So 2-hand ventilation, 2-person ventilation continued with the oral airway. ENT surgeon was called. The hospital was exactly in the center of the city. Anybody could arrive there within 5 to 10 minutes. He arrived in 15 minutes to the operation theater, and tracheostomy was done within the next 10 minutes. No desaturation, surgery rescheduled and performed after 1 week, and subsequently tracheostomy closed, happy ending. So there was not a problem, because somehow we were able to get a timely help. Early surgical airway is one of the key factors in crisis management related to airway. Next. Last patient, that's a child. 1-year-old child, palatoplasty, duration approximately 4 hours. Immediately following extubation, severe tongue edema and multiple intubation attempts failed. Mask ventilation not possible. No supraglottic devices of appropriate size probably. Again, this is about 10 years ago. And tracheostomy was done. By then, probably the damage was done. Next. Yeah, the patient suffered hypoxic brain damage next day and expired. So out of 4, 2 deaths and 2 outcomes, safe outcome. Now we'll see how the genesis of the crisis. Next. So with this background, is it clear till now? Is it clear?
Very much audible, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So a genesis of the airway crisis. How from here a crisis develops. Next, please. Yeah. So why I put this slide like this? See, airway crisis I have written prominently in red letter, means it's a dangerous situation. It happens once in a way. So for every single airway crisis, what you don't see or what you don't get to see is a number of maybe 100 times, 200 times, 300 times of failed intubation, failed supraglottic airway device, difficult intubation, just managed intubation, difficult extubation, airway lost during the surgery and reintubation, laryngospasm, so on and so forth. You would not call them crisis because they were managed. So what you see airway crisis is something what we call the tip of the iceberg. So it is all the more important to manage that because you see it in a very critical condition, but your experience may not be immediately recalled. Next. Yeah. So airway management is a time critical patient management domain. You don't have sufficient time, like you can't take enough time if you're doing an internal jugular vein cannulation or a narrow block or something. You can take your own sweet time. There is no hurry. We always stress on doing it in a very unhurried manner, but not for airway crisis or when there is a critical event in develop under progress or actual critical event. So it's not and airway management is not an isolated set of techniques or use of equipment. It is a part of the patient management. I always like one saying, say that there is always a patient attached to the airway. You are not managing the airway, you are managing the patient. And the patient management neither begins nor ends with intubation. Even the airway management neither begins nor ends with intubation. Being able to intubate any patient is not the criteria nor a reflection of our clinical abilities. So let us not describe or make ourselves a big person saying that I can intubate any patient or that person or that doctor can intubate any patient. So for that is not a great reflection about ourselves. How you manage the airway as a part of the patient management is what reflects you, which includes a lot more than your ability to intubate. If you don't intubate a patient also, it doesn't diminish your abilities or reputation as long as you ensure that there is no harm done to the patient. Next. So even when the intent is good, brain saving and life saving, that's the intent, it can end as brain and life threatening. We all will agree. That is the hypoxic brain damage. Next. So clinicians by actions or inactions can be the saviors or they can be a sort of the destroyers. That's a sad truth about anesthesiology profession. So this can happen either because of our actions or inactions. Yeah, next. So difficulty turning into disaster is what is a crisis, isn't it? So when it is only difficulty, you don't call it a crisis. You call it just a difficulty. So this difficulty may be identified, it may be missed, or it may be feared, or it may be a normal airway converted to difficulty because of our mismanagement, or it could be a airway complications which is not unexpected. If we fail to manage that airway complication, that also can lead to crisis. So it needs certain other factors, not this just difficulty. It needs patient factors, logistics. We'll see more details subsequently, and the operator related factors. In the absence of that, it will just resolve that. Then errors related to techniques, oxygenation, decision, judgment. Those are the things which are important in the genesis of a crisis. So if you just apply to any critical incident that has happened in your workplace, maybe not last month, maybe 1 year, every anesthesiologist has a story of his own to talk about the airway management crisis. Next. So airway crisis can develop at any location and at any phase of perioperative care. So it could be induction, maintenance. So it's a false belief that during intubation only you develop crisis. It can be, in fact, many crises develop in the post-extubation phase, and some of them, especially when there's a shared airway, it can happen during the maintenance phase also. And it can be in ICU, emergency, OT, ward, pre-hospital, where else and where else not. Everywhere it can develop. Next. Next, yeah. Okay, contributory factors, yes, you can generate a crisis or you can contribute to a crisis either by inappropriate actions or by not doing something. So by doing something wrong, like using usual rather than needed technique. Yes, I usually manage the patient with supraglottic device for every case. I don't mind. I'm used to that. Like, no, I want to use only supraglottic. I know how the patient behaves. I am very confident about IGL. I can manage in any position, any patient, obese or laparoscopy. I don't care. So that is not correct. Or so using usual rather than needed technique. Second is seeking help based on personal preference rather than capabilities. I want to call Dr. B because he's a good friend. He always helps me. He knows he knows me personally well and he will be sympathetic, all these things. So I call him. But in the bracket, he is good in regional techniques. He doesn't have much expertise in difficult airway technique. So it doesn't help. Then unstructured response to the crisis. You do something haphazard. You give once you say you give a 7-size tube, next as the nurse is preparing, you bed it like this. Then when they give you, no, you remove the stylet and give me. Next you say you change the blade. It's not a correct way of doing. What are the inactions? Incomplete assessment of the so that's already discussed. And okay, you have assessed. If you introspect ourselves, how many times we have acted upon the assessment findings? How many times we really critically go through the findings of the assessment? So failure to act on the findings, failure to plan for failure, cognitive paralysis. You just stop thinking, you don't know what to do, and then failure to recognize or acknowledge CICO. At some 1 second, please, just about. Okay. So failure to act. Slide, please. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Okay. So if you see NAP4 judgment, the findings, human factors was responsible in many a significant proportion of the cases. Like they involved training and education were some of the common factors. It's not that they are not qualified. They are qualified, they are trained. But training in human factors or the team working, all these things, and some of the wrong actions were use of first generation supraglottic device in high risk patients, SAD, difficult airway cases without rescue plan. So using supraglottic device is not wrong, but you must have a plan for intubation, and failure to use capnogram. That is really surprising that in UK also, where capnogram is available so much, failure to use that has been a cause of airway disasters. Next. Yeah. So this is one article which I recommend every resident, everybody to read. This is 2018. Tim Cook, who is a pioneer or a part of this NAP4 team. Next. Yeah. So I don't know. Can you read this? Can you read this?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So these are some of the events, pre-crisis event which led to crisis. So these are some of the things which I already told you. It is related to oxygenation, related to larynx and attempts and the replacement device and transition through different plans, steps A, B, C, D, how slow it was, deterioration from oxygenation to can oxygenate to cannot oxygenate, etc. Okay, and delay in performing FONA and wrong performance of that. Next. So translated into process, what we have said, failure in the assessment, inadequate understanding of oxygenation. See, oxygenation is not a simple holding mass for 8 vital capacity breaths or 5, whatever number you call, or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. That is not complete oxygenation. We'll see that little later. Persisting with attempts related to personality of the anesthesiologist also, then failure to recognize or inappropriate choice, hesitation and lack of expertise. So emergency surgical airways delayed, delay, lack of teamwork and expertise. So all these things are the processes which appear to be contributing. Next. Yeah, next. The question is why we are so reluctant to go for life-threatening the surgical airway. Next. Yeah. So this again another 4 patients. Just incidentally, this patient A, dental abscess, patient B, dental abscess, C, dental abscess, D also dental abscess. One died during induction, no surgical airway attempted. Second patient died in the postoperative period due to upper airway obstruction. Again, Ludwig's angina, unsuccessful percutaneous tracheostomy. Remember, percutaneous tracheostomy is an elective airway procedure in ventilated patient. It's not an emergency life-saving procedure. And emergency surgical airway also was unsuccessful. Next. So these 2 patients also unsuccessful or inappropriate. Cannula cricothyrotomy or percutaneous tracheostomy. Cannula cricothyrotomy cannot be effective as a life-saving procedure unless you have a high-pressure airway source. Next. Yeah. So these are something called event triggers. Some of them the latent factors. So event triggers are environment. Suppose the exact whatever you ask for is not there. At that time, some of the either the suction is not working at all, the oxygen is not available, some disasters of that kind. Then the patient factors, patient starts bleeding, airway obstruction, or the operator faints or cannot decide, second person is not there, or the latent factors like logistics, the complete ventilation failure. This is one more terminology where the inability to oxygenate or intubate still has not resulted in hypoxia, but you are not able to ventilate. It's a very small window during which you need to take corrective action. Then personality of the performer. Next. Next. Yeah. Management of the, yeah, next, correct. Next. Yeah. So this is the name 2005, Elaine Bromley. If you type, you get enough of information, including the story from the husband and the coroner's or the inquiry report. So these findings are from the inquiry report. So here, acceptable actions on the part of the anesthesiologist was his qualification was excellent. He was very much experienced and reputed. Assessment and plan was accepted. Facilities and system, except that they didn't have entry catheter, everything else was all right. Monitor, induction, everything was all right till the first intubation attempt. Okay, management of the initial steps was okay. But pre-oxygenation, it's a question mark. And you can argue it was not required because it was not a expected difficult airway. That is right. Or you want to be extra cautious and you want to oxygenate. That's also right. Next. Yeah. So pre-oxygenation, is it unacceptable? Maybe or may not be. Definitely, it will increase the safety margin. There is no doubt about it. Whether this part was forgetting about this patient for the current state, current situation, it's always safer to pre-oxygenate when you have a slightest difficulty about the doubt about the difficulty. So retrospectively, there were some hints that it could be difficult. Next. Persisted with intubation was the difficulty. This patient did not need intubation per se, no risk of aspiration. There was no adequate ventilation in between attempts. Multiple attempts were not at all acceptable. So SpO2 was falling, and fiber optic, which should be the first technique if at all you are trying, that was put as the last one. And it was also shown that the anesthesiologists both were not familiar with the way to intubate through the intubating LMA. There's a flap in that, so you have to negotiate that flap and come out of the intubating LMA. Next. So oxygen was the priority. Avoiding multiple attempts was the priority. FOB recommended as always intubate through a supraglottic airway device. If you look at the IDA airway algorithm, then you see this one, FOB recommended for intubation through a CD. Next. Early surgical airway, yes, was not considered in spite of everything being ready. Within 2 minutes or within a minute, they could have inserted the surgical airway. So, in spite of ventilation was not possible or grossly inadequate. That was the sad part of this whole story. Any one of us might be in that anesthesiologist position. Very unfortunate. Next. Yeah. So, ESA could be brain saving and life saving in those situations. Next. So, teamwork principles not followed, did not heed to the suggestions, didn't follow the timeline, and wrong decision. And the situation awareness was lost. Where he is, what is likely the result of his inactions, all these things probably lost sight of. Next. So next, yeah, next. Shifted the patient to recovery and inadequate handover. So that was not a patient just to shift to recovery and hand over and come back and start the next patient. Patient had to be later put on ventilator, and then patient died next day. The anesthesiologist was not available appropriately for the post-operative care. Might have benefited from hyperventilation. He did not stay with the patient through the critical stage. Next. Next, yeah. So you can put next two also. That is by mistake actually. Animation has come. Next. Yeah. So patient 2, if you look at, patient 2, if you look at, there was a complete assessment. It was anticipated. Communication problem was recognized and managed excellently, and nature of the primary disease also was taken into consideration. Next. Yeah, planning was elaborate and attention to detail was there. Adequately numbered 4 members were there, and everybody was utilized very clearly without any confusion, and roles were assigned. Next. So just at this point, how many of you heard about vortex approach? You have heard? Vortex approach. Residents have heard? Some residents can answer. Have you heard? Exam going, so final years? Final years residents. Okay, we'll go ahead. Am I heard?
You are heard, sir. They are in they're sitting in a big hall, sir. I don't know if
Okay.
it's possible
Fine,
for to interact.
fine. Yeah, you can just pass on. Next slide.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, this is Vertex approach. I'm sure some of you would have seen. So this represents a next slide or next press enter. Yeah, this is described as a high acuity implementation tool. I'm not going into much details. You see the three, what you call the three sections in the entry of this funnel. So that is, if you see, the face mask, endotracheal tube, and supraglottic airway. There are only three possible non-invasive ways of airway management. All these three can be rotated depending on the clinical condition in a emergency, and none of them should be repeated more than 3 times with appropriate changes, which include manipulations or use of adjuncts or change in the size or shape and use of suction and relaxant. You please see this. This gives you an excellent perspective of approach to an emergency. So down, if you go, you enter the narrow portion of the funnel, which is a dangerous zone. Initially, it is green. As you go down, cyanosis, that's a bluish color. And finally, you might end up in emergency surgical airway, where you are doing it under a very significantly restricted time and restricted environment with so much of pressure and time critical setting. Next. Yeah. So key points of Vertex. Next, anything is there in that slide? Only this. Yeah. Okay. So key points are, it's a universally applicable. It includes the gist of all the guidelines. There are about 38 guidelines for airway management. So it includes the important core aspects of that. And it teaches you both technical and cognitive skills, reduces the errors, and assumes independent competence. It's for once you're competent, then this should be followed, and it encourages the use of critical language, that you are declaring CaCO status, you are in the green zone, means oxygenation is safe. So all these things become very, very important. Next. Yeah, this I leave it to you to read. What are the preparation or the foundation part of this Vertex approach? You please read this 2016 article. You know this, the cognition, behavior, psychology, motor skills, access, utility. So everything comes as a preparation for you, long-term preparation, and a sort of internalization of all these practices, protocols, knowledge, skills, etc. Next. Yeah, next. So planning for green zone, that is the safe zone, situation in a urgent and complexity. Next. So here you are, when the patient is in green zone, situation could be complex or urgent, but airway is stable, oxygenation is normal, and patient is, you have to see at that point, is there a risk of aspiration, or you want to wake up the patient, all when the patient is in green zone, to prevent the patient from slipping down. Next. And it depends on the experience of the clinician. Yeah. So next. Yeah. Okay. So difficult or failed oxygenation, you have to decide. So this is very important. You know that I was telling you, just giving oxygen with a mask is not oxygenation. You have to ensure that the expelled oxygen is also more than 0.9. And these patients, obese or agitated patient, pulmonary or cardiac dysfunction, ASA 3, 4 in ICU, they cannot be adequately pre-oxygenated. It is not just showing SaO2 of 99 or 100%, which is indicative of oxygen, such adequate oxygen load or store. It is the PaO2 increase, which is very important, which is reflected by FeO2 of more than 0.9. Next. So strategies for managing such patient, you have to include in your crisis management. You need to think of different ones like the position, non-rebreathing mask, or pressure support ventilation, delayed sequence intubation. That is where it's the opposite of rapid sequence intubation, where you give mild sedation and oxygenate the patient before you intubate the patient. Next. Yeah, I am not going to details of this. Next. This is for you to this slightly. It's just a part of that to show that this is something which you need to learn. The delayed sequence intubation, the guidelines. It's particularly in the emergency department. You can use it in the OT also. Next. Yeah, oxygenation during intubation. So now it is called pre-oxygenation and per-oxygenation or para-oxygenation, where during intubation you can give through in different ways, either through jet ventilation. Next, you see the next picture. So this is a mechanism of desaturation during intubation. According to the mechanism, you need to manage the oxygenation. If it is due to low FRC or airway obstruction, then any amount of oxygen you give from supraglottic part, it will not be effective. So one prerequisite for improving the oxygen status is absence of or relieving of upper airway obstruction or lower airway obstruction. If there is airway obstruction, unless that is relieved, your any other amount of oxygen will not be helpful. Next. So apneic oxygenation, you have so many ways. Next. Yeah, this is, I'm not going to details of that. This is for you to read. Next. Yeah. I'm just see, this is a high flow oxygen which will prolong the oxygen administration. There's also a way of providing oxygen through the laryngoscopic blade. It's called pharyngeal oxygenation. You can keep another tube to the buccal side. It's called buccal oxygenation. Next. Yeah, OptiFlow. Next. And the 10 minutes I'll be finishing. No desaturation technique is called nasal oxygenation during attempts at intubation. Next. Jet ventilation. I'm not talking about the conventional emergency jet ventilation. Supraglottic jet ventilation is possible for delaying the oxygen desaturation. Next. Yeah, this is what is the supraglottic oxygenation technique, where there is either a nasal airway or through endotracheal tube, which is modified for jet ventilation. You can provide jet ventilation for maintaining oxygenation during the airway management under control condition when patient is stable. Next. Yeah, these are the modified nasal airway and modified endotracheal tubes. Next. Yeah. This is in pediatric patients, you can give oxygen through and anesthesia also through a nasal airway. Through the other nose, you can do fiber optic or you can do intubation, whatever you want to do, you can do through the. So these are some of the strategies which will help you to prevent the patient from deteriorating into a crisis. Next. Yeah, this is also the moment we start nasal intubation. What I do is like ask the assistant, if there is a high risk patient, you ask them to connect to the vein circuit and give oxygen continuously so that you can take little more time for your nasal intubation. Particularly for residents, this will be definitely helpful. Only thing is, remember the hypertensive response to intubation, so you can give a second dose of propofol. Next. So last part is prevention of crisis. Very important part. Next. Yeah. So prevention of airway crisis is the 4 components are, yeah. Next 2. Skill and knowledge, human factor, airway education, and logistics. All these things should be taken care of. Next. We'll just quickly go through each of them. Skills, yes, it's a lifelong process. We must always not forget that or remember that learning is a lifelong process, and the role of skills, it should not be too much glorified. At the same time, it should not be underestimated. And it should be based on the principles. Application of skills should be based on the principles and fit within the recommendation of the guidelines and algorithm, and should be associated with monitoring appropriately. And finally, the skills should be considered as part of the comprehensive care of the patient, which means medications, monitoring, certain other procedures. So all these things together should be integrated into comprehensive patient care. Next. Yeah. So skills can be basic and advanced. You must retain it. Acquiring the skill is one thing. Retention is one thing. For example, you have learned the basic intubation. Then unless you intubate within certain period of time again, you will likely to lose that. And unless you do in difficult airway, you will not be able to do in an emergency. So these kind of things, and update your skill also regularly. by workshop or whatever it is. Next. Yeah. So next, yeah. So skill and knowledge. Sorry, there are some problems in the animation. So use of capnogram, very, very important. Then airway and lung ultrasound. It's not just airway ultrasound. Lung ultrasound helps you to confirm the intubation and adequacy of ventilation, to rule out the endobronchial intubation. So all these things you can make out with lung ultrasound, which is inexpensive, real time, does not cause any patient harm. Capnogram must be very carefully and regularly used and focus on oxygenation. One person should be assigned for monitoring of the patient, which includes saturation and capnogram and hemodynamic patient stability. And the performing team should look at or listen to this particular person or the team. Yeah, choose what is good for the patient and not what you are familiar with or what we know. That's a very, very important thing. Next. Full you get this slide. Yeah. So logistics, yeah, primary equipment, ancillary equipment, that's a backup equipment or the suction, oxygen, etc. Then trained assistants, all these things. So airway card must be unique to each department. Everybody should know where is what size is available, should be regularly checked and signed and documented. You should not we should not do it just for inspection purpose. It should be a part of quality initiative of the department. Next. So these are some of the personalities. Next? Complete this slide, please. Yeah. So these are the personality traits, anti-authority. I don't need to ask anybody. I don't care. I'll do it. Or impulsiveness. I need to do it immediately. I can't wait for the video laryngoscope. I'll just do with the direct laryngoscope. Or invulnerability. I have never had any problem in intubation. I don't think I'll have this time also. I don't care what other person had. Or Mako personality. Yes, I can do it anything. I don't mind. Even if it is bleeding, I can do. I can give relaxant for any patient. Or resignation. What is the use now? Everything already patient is bleeding, patient edematous, I cannot do anything. So anything of these personalities are they are not good traits. We need to introspect and change them to a better perspective. That is possible by developing leadership quality, making appropriate decision, critical communication, that is ISBAR or the S-bar, whatever you call, the identification, situation, recommendation, assessment, all these things. No? So then team working is very important. Situational awareness, where you are, what you are doing, how much time is critical, and the influence of personality, the stress, ego, fixation errors. When there is a crisis going on, you should not think this itself or this is the only cause for the crisis. It is because I used only size 3 blade. That is the reason for failure. Definitely nothing else. No, it can be multiple causes. You must consider a 360-degree view or a perspective of the situation, overall perspective, what we call a bird's eye view. The other person who is observing or leader should be able to tell you what is wrong. Listen to him or her. And one person should be documenting the event, timeline of the event. That helps you, because later after the event, that must be analyzed, not to find fault with the people, but to find the ways how the things have gone wrong, how you can correct and improve the performance next time, and you to reassess to see whether the recommendations have been implemented or not. Next. Yeah, human factors, training and application. Simulation is the best way to learn, and seniority is not equal to experience, is not equal to expertise. I'm sorry, this third one is expertise. So I'm sure all of us agree. If I am asked to give cardiac anesthesia, even because I have some 25, 30 years of experience, I cannot do anything. I cannot claim that I can do ECMO very well. So nothing, it's not possible. So when you are in distress, always better to discuss, then decide and do something appropriately. And then ego has no role in the airway management. No one can master all the techniques. Always consider stop. See, another person who is with you has a better thinking capacity at that point of time, better clarity of mind, and he might have a different set of techniques or technical proficiency or knowledge base, which will be helpful in that situation. So focus on the patient, not focusing on ourselves or our hurt ego, etc. Yeah. Next. Last two slides. Airway education. Yes, I am not. It's a continuous process, and conference, journal, accredited training, progress, awareness. Next. Yeah. Next. Yeah. So these are some of the ways we can train. You must look into the registries, and a department can have a register. In our department earlier in KSAG, we started an airway registry, which proved to be quite useful. You know, one was regional anesthesia registry, other one was a airway registry. So you can generate lot of data about your own department activities. So which will be more authentic than reading from NAP4, than reading from DAD or anything. I'm sure this will be done in your department in coming times. And closed claim project, some ways of inviting anonymous reporting of the events. So I think I'll just summarize with 2 slides. So next, that's fine. Interdisciplinary reactions. Next. Yeah. To summarize, airway crisis can develop in any airway management, and it can contribute to morbidity and mortality. It does not arise de novo. That means spontaneously no crisis arises. It just doesn't come up like the Udbhava we call in Kannada. From nowhere it doesn't appear. It is a progress or a regress or deterioration of a previously controllable situation to an uncontrollable situation, from which you can still retrieve if you apply the basic principles and have adequate facilities and knowledge, etc. And technical skills are important but not sufficient. Non-technical skills play important role. Logistics, training, awareness, etc. are equally important. Composite airway failure, you just remember, and failure of one technique can indicate the failure or higher chance of failing in the other techniques also. Mask ventilation and intubation difficulties, they are somehow interrelated. Increasing difficulty in one, you can predict that the other one also could be difficult. Next slide, last slide. During intubation, several techniques can be used for oxygenation. You must that pre-oxygenation, per-oxygenation, then no desat, trio, nasal oxygenation. Simplest is nasal prongs with a high flow of oxygen, but no oxygenation technique is appropriate, adequate if the airway obstruction is not taken care of. And adequate oxygenation and airway management techniques are not same. So that is why in one article suggested it's not just ABCD, OABCD, that is, it should begin with the oxygenation part. And last slide, next slide. One more slide is that. Yeah, no, in between the summary and last, this all. Okay, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and we have come to the end. Thank you for the patient hearing. Very long time, I think.
But it was a very good talk, sir. We all are benefited by listening to your talk, sir.
Thank you. Only disadvantage, but excellent quality audio and video. Your IT department should be congratulated.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for that. But then I don't think it was possible for our postgraduate students sitting in a hall there in the seminar hall to interact.
That's fine. But they could see clearly. They could see and hear clearly.
Yes, sir. And that's arranged on a bigger screen over there, sir.
Oh, great. That's fine. Then thank you so much for all the opportunity. We will interact with you more often. Yeah.
Our IT department is strong, sir. That's why we could.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, they have done a great work. I can see everything, like you and the slides. So I had kept my laptop ready for slides, but I didn't have to do that.
Sir, as a token of appreciation for your lecture, we have a certificate to be given to you, sir. So
okay,
we will send it later online.
Yes, sure, madam. No problem.
Just take a look.
No problem. Yeah. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Nice. It will be very precious.
Dr. Shivanand also receives a same kind of certificate.
Yes, he deserves it. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Show it, please.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir.
Oh, it's my pleasure, madam.
Sir, about our next meetings that we had talked about,
Yeah.
what exactly, how exactly do you think we should go, sir? We were thinking of arranging for your talks on one of the Saturdays in month, sir, like third Saturday or fourth Saturday.
That is fine. Only thing is that Saturday may not be fixed because one Saturday in a month I will have duties. So other than that, other Saturday we should be.
Okay, sir. So you will let us know which
That also actually, yeah, because I'll have to let you know only around 1st of every month. Not 1st, about 20th of 20 to 25th of every month. I know the next month's roster, so I can inform you.
Okay.
So before the beginning of the month, we can decide which Saturday I can take the son. No problem at all.
Okay, okay, sir.
So for that, if you can have a sort of discussion, that will be good. Some of them.
Okay, sir.
Interaction with the PGs.
Okay, sir. We will try to arrange that, sir, because that
Yeah,
will work out this time. We'll see to it that works out.
No
sir.
problem. That will be a smaller crowd. No, it's only department, right?
Yes,
so, okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sir,
Yeah.
thank you
Thank
so
you very
much,
much.
sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's my pleasure. Yeah.
The delegates participants.
Thank you, delegates. Thank you all the participants who have logged in.
Yeah.
Thank you for logging in.